How's it going, Spoopy?
It's going well.
Good, good. So, tonight we're going to be talking about elves, which coming from Ethan and I, we've always had a bias towards dwarfs. I feel like, and let's just, which we'll just point that out now. There's a reason why I titled this stream as elves and their BS. So Ethan, you far more. You taught me D&D, and I know you've done a lot more lore about elves. I've looked at the notes of it, but what are the four What are the four races that the players can play as? Let me go ahead and pull up my D&D Beyond to find that out too.
The four? I believe there's more than four.
Might be more than
You have your high elves, wood elves, dark elves, sea elves, shadow elves. Eldarin are kind of elf adjacent.
okay.
Those are the I believe those are like the more the fundamental elves that have they're based off of seasons. There's the summer, winter, autumn, and spring Eldarin.
Okay. All right. So that's cool because that's the reason why I mentioned fours because in D&D Beyond as of right now I have high elf, wood elf, Eldarin elf, and dark elf.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also using the new content, the new races and stuff.
Yeah, I believe that there should also be sea elves, and they're called shadow elves or Shadar Kai.
Okay. Shadow elves or Shadar Kai.
Yeah, they're a little bit of an odd one. They're from the Shadowfell. There's like servants of the Raven Queen.
Oh, okay. All right. That's right. Drow are correct. The dark elves.
They're not Drow.
No.
Drow are different.
Drow are different. Okay. So
Yeah, Drow are from the Underdark. They have that matriarchal society. Shadar Kai are purely just servants of the Raven Queen.
Okay. I'm trying to pull up
For
the
the
list
most part.
of all the races. I gonna say I have half elf, half halfling. Halfling's not one. Anyway, so sorry, my apologies. I'm trying to find a list of all the elves we're gonna be talking about tonight.
Okay, yeah. If you let me pull up on D&D Beyond and see what we have to work with.
You know what? I just found out what I needed. I looked up elf traits and I see all the elves you were talking about. The Ariani Wood Elf, Ariani High Elf, the Dark Elf, Eldarian, the new stuff as well. Okay, I just didn't own that content. Okay, so that's where my confusion was.
Yeah, I guess Shadar Kai are considered legacy.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, we can talk about them still. I was kind of thinking tonight is we just kind of like pick out one of these elves and just talk about generally like what they are about, and then our take on them. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Ethan. A lot of elves generally have the thing in common, in which like we kind of joke about it, but a lot of elves can be classified as, oh hey, they live really old, they think they're better than you, and they don't really care about things about themselves because they can just like. I think a part of it plays in with age and being able to live 850 years.
Well, I mean, you have to think about it, right? I mean, imagine if your grandparents couldn't die. And they just lived a really long time. I mean, elves, they're just like really they're long lived, and so they're just all racist.
Yeah, that's about right. It's like grandma and grandpa. Grandma and grandpa eventually become boomers, but holy shit, they're like the mega boomers.
Yeah, elves are basically mega boomers if you think about it. They're mega boomers that live in trees.
Fair, that's about right. So speaking of kind of elves off that, I think no one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when I think of what we're talking about right now, I think of high elves.
Yeah, that's the classic, like, uber racist, pretentious, obnoxious elves are the high elves, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So and I feel like their kind of settings is, like I feel like it's, monarchy wise. I found out I looked up a little bit about elves, and I read somewhere online that elves have a higher sense of justice and freedom. Kind of sounds egalitarian to me, so I was kind of thinking, like, if, like, for example, in the World of Embers I'm working on, I have the elves, the high elves, basically like the high elves being control the biggest gate to my world's Feywild. They are technologically superior. They are an empire in itself, but they are very egalitarian, constitutional, almost different, almost foreign to the kingdoms in the material world at the time. Because the reason why I have you guys in Embers is it's Victorian era, but it's also like I haven't really gotten into it because of just the way things have, but also like Rights era. So I always envision the elves having like this major breakdown of like, hey, we have this is our last empire. There were other elves, because I like the idea of runes and like dungeons, Okay, I had Dungeons and Dragons, dungeons in my world's Aorweld, and be like, oh, that's like the older elves, you know what I mean? Like, imagine like all these elves are split off because they come from the same elf, you know what I mean? The same kind of starting point. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common lore point, is all elves came from an original elf thing of some kind.
Gotcha. Okay, see, that's somewhere I feel like I was kind of thinking about it when I was doing these elves. And one of the things I kind of thought about was maybe having like a almost like a patriarchal pantheon, like, and then have each elf be like a sibling of each other. I'm not sure if you're familiar. I think the story is called Czech, Lech, and Rust. It's a medieval story about how the Polish, the Czechs, and how the Russians got their ethnicities. And the story goes about these three brothers who went off separate ways and founded said lands by their name. Yeah,
I haven't heard that myself.
I honestly only know about it because it was an achievement in Crusader Kings 2.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I know it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that idea of like almost pantheons with that kind of separation, because there's so much separations in elves, like having almost like sibling-ish related, almost like something like that would be interesting. I don't know. I feel like we all love the Drow Raven Queen, Raven Queen? No, that's Dark Elf.
The Drow is Lilith.
Drow is Lilith. Thank you.
Yeah, they worship Lilith according to traditional D&D Drow.
Okay. Interesting. So take that for example. Drow and Lilith. Like, I watched the video on Pointy Hat about this, and he went off his own little side tangent about how the Underdark is all the same. Everyone down there. No, that's RuneSmith. RuneSmith mentioned how everyone in the Underdark is all slavers. And Pointy Hat mentioned...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, everything down there is terrible.
Uh-huh. Like, I entirely agree. And that's where, like, Pointy Hat kind of goes off that, because D&D is kind of changing that a little bit with, like, this new... her name's escaping me, but, like, a new god of worship of the other side of Drow that aren't just all Lilith. But, like, I don't know. I feel like it's stale to say they're all slavers. So, taking Drow for instance, what are some of the... I guess I could ask you, like, is there any of these races or anything in particular about the Drow or even the High Elves that you would want to change?
Well, the thing about the Drow is they were always designed as the, like, bad guy of the elves, right?
Okay.
That was their purpose in D&D. In the lore of, I guess technically we're currently talking about Forgotten Realms lore specifically.
Yeah, that's the lore I see what D&D Beyond and more fluid in.
Yeah, that's like kind of Forgotten Realms is like the generic like D&D blanket lore. If you're talking about D&D and you're not being specific, you're talking about Forgotten Realms usually.
Uh-huh.
So they were put in a place, and you have to remember that this was designed back in the 80s.
Yeah.
When we made specific races to be bad. You know, we don't really do that anymore, but there's still that really that prevalent, this race is the bad guy race, and here's why. But you do have the thing about having that bad guy race is then you have something like the Legends of Drizzt. His name's spelled weirdly. It was a book series written about the Forgotten Realms, about a dark elf who escaped the Underdark and was this massive hero that went on all these adventures.
Okay.
So you have that. The Dark Elves are probably one of the most depraved of the elf societies out there, according to the lore.
Okay.
Currently standing, anyway.
Yeah.
And they're a matriarchal society that worship Lilith, that is the god of... Let me look this up really quick. Is she a... Oh, she's an archdevil. No, this is the wrong Lilith. Hold on.
Just realized now I should probably be taking notes. Yeah, no, I meant to do a lot more work today, but I got sidetracked with the Browns. I didn't expect them to actually win this thing.
Oh, no, I completely understand. The Browns winning is wild. Yeah, I apologize. They do not worship Lilith. That is Diablo lore that was sneaking into my head there.
Oh, okay.
They worship Lolth, the
Lolth.
Spider Queen.
Lolth the Spider Queen, okay. Yeah, Lolth the Spider Queen, that makes much more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm gonna say... Lolth, Forgotten Realms, yeah. Sick art online. So, if that's the case, like, I don't know, like, I see why in the 80s they made it that way, you know what I mean? Because that was the thinking at the time, and that's where, like, as like me when I try and like do Embers, because I don't know if I told you, but like I remember when I was like talking to you, and I was like, because when I first started DMing, I used Forgotten Realms 3rd edition stuff and made it a little bit my way. But then I was like, yeah, I'm going to do a module and shit like that. And you're like, yeah, just make sure you do it, like, be careful using Forgotten Realms. So I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to do it my own way then. But yeah, that where it leads, though, is the problem is, like, Drow and Dark Elves. Like, for one thing that kind of comes to mind is, like, the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves are the ones, the Dark Elves are in the Underdark, correct?
Yeah, and that's where they tend to hang out.
And Drow tend to be where?
Drow are Dark Elves.
Drow are Dark Elves. Okay, I see now.
My apologies if there was a confusion.
No.
Yeah, were you referring to the other race that are called Shadow Elves?
No.
Because those are different.
No, I was referring to Dark Elves.
Okay, yeah, Dark Elves and Drow are synonymous.
Okay, perfect. All right, that works out then, because this is what I have, some rough ideas I have for Drow Elves. In particular, like, fun lore is why are they in the Underdark? Why are they in my world's Underdark? In the world of Embers, I've toyed with the idea of having them, like, in the material world somewhere, because I'm still rough and I'm still learning my pagan and stuff. But fun fact, I've been doing a lot of research about fairies and elves and dwarves. In fact, I got raspberries because next time I work on a project with my hands, I'm gonna make a dwarf offering with the raspberries. it's a pagan thing. I find it interesting, so I'm gonna do it. Why the fuck not?
There you go.
Yeah. Which fun fact? I found out dwarves. Yeah, we all know their Tolkien used their names for his characters, like Doran. But I also found it funny that they were described as not wearing any clothing, but having their beards be long enough to be their clothing.
Yeah, that is something that Tolkien often wrote about, was dwarves' beards.
Do you really dedicate that much? I need to read Tolkien.
It's not a excessive amount of the prose of Lord of the Rings is not about dwarves' beards, but dwarves are repeatedly mentioned to be very, very proud of their beards.
Nice. I've never seen. That's why you can never see even in, I don't know. I'm getting my words jumbled up. Dwarves and beards are synonymous. It's almost like cigarettes and a beanie. If someone's smoking a cigarette, they have to have a beanie on, especially if they're a dwarf. It just fits. Actually looks more like my Uncle Michael, actually. Sorry, Uncle Michael, love you.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so Drow. One of the ideas I have is wherever the Drow are, if they go with the material world, I can very well, or even Feywild. But the idea I have is what if they were in this world driven underground, something similar as to the dwarves I have, which the Draugr in my world is they're in the Shadowfall. They're a dwarven kingdom that basically were invaded and played turtle so long that they discovered a portal to Timnir, and when they got there and dug, their skin became blue for reasons that I haven't figured the fuck out yet. I say it's the sun because that's how the sun works, right? Because they have a blue sun. But yeah, that's an example of what I'm talking about. Going to, I don't know. It would make. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I like the idea of them escaping and finding. I like a reason why they're in the Underdark. I guess I'm trying to say is. Does Forgotten Realms have a reason to, or what's your take?
Yes, Forgotten Realms does have a reason they're in the Underdark.
Okay.
The Drow are essentially a cut-off race of, or not a cut-off, a splinter group of elves that were fanatics of Lolth, and they were banished down to the Underdark when Lolth was banished down to the Underdark. I forget exactly what event led up to that.
Okay.
But that's the reason why they're down there, is that Lolth was banished down there and they went with her.
Okay. Perfect. I don't know. What's some things that you would change if you had to? What I guess quality of life improvements. Because I don't know. A fun thing that I find so a little fact about me, I like to watch bad movies, right? I watched a really stupid one lately that I'm still recovering from. I watched another bad movie afterwards to get the taste out of my mouth, and it still wasn't enough. But anyway, I like to look at bad movies and think of ways to improve them or to try and save them in a way. There are certain movies that just can't be saved, but it's a fun thing to think about. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if you could change it, I don't know, what are some changes that you would make about any certain things about the Drow in particular? Because I feel like the Drow, like you said, meant to be the bad guy. I feel like D&D's trying to change that now, but with mixed reception, I feel like.
I think that having an entire race of people, I guess, be just blanketly bad definitely doesn't look good for any kind of PR, and I definitely think that Wizards of the Coast is suffering in the PR department recently.
Yeah.
So they're trying to make all these changes to make everything ambiguous. And that's fine. They're allowed to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I think that the drow definitely serve a purpose. They kind of give a... Well, actually, we can kind of talk about... To talk about the problems with the drow, we can kind of bring up a semi-adjacent race. It's not a race that also worships Lolth. But another race that they didn't necessarily originate from the Underdark, and they're not currently in the Underdark. But you can talk about the Githyanki, who are very similar to the Drow, in a lot of ways. So the Githyanki, their whole lore is that they were enslaved by mind flayers as a whole race, and eventually, the race of the Gith escaped the mind flayers, right? And they split off into two races. And we're not going to talk about the Gith Zerai because they're very not Drow adjacent. They're very different from the Githyanki. So they're not really relevant to the conversation here. But the Githyanki are essentially space pirates.
Okay.
Militant space pirates. They live inside of the astral sea where time doesn't pass. And they pop out periodically throughout the centuries in the material plane, raid it, and then they go back. They have a very militant society, and they follow a Lich Queen that I can't recall the name of right now. But so you can see there's a lot of similarities of these two races between the Drow and the Githyanki.
Yeah, the perspective I see on it is the Githyanki almost are like, they're pirates, mercenaries in their name only in a way, but serving themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I see how that's ambiguous and them being quote-unquote the bad guys. But I don't know. They seem regardless, they're militant. They're militant and are in their own ways like far away from where, I don't know. It's hard unless magic happens. It's hard for players to stumble into this astral sea, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not easy to get there. But I think it's worth kind of bringing them into the conversation just to kind of come up with a lot of the problems that the Drow specifically have. I think the Drow are the most unique race of all of the elves. I think they have the most interesting problems. So the way that the Drow society is based is it's a very it's a matriarchy, so it is entirely they view male Drow as lesser beings.
Okay.
That's a big part of Drow society right there. And any male Drow that is seen essentially as no better than a servant or a slave.
Okay.
And the Drow society is also, I believe it's split up into these different houses that split up into multiple houses, and I believe it's basically an oligarchy of these various different houses that run Elven society or Drow society. And I think you could take some of that stuff out. You could make them less extreme. I don't think they need to be that extreme. That could be something that could be addressed there. Or you could give them more of a backstory too, as to maybe why they're so extreme. Because the only real backstory to why they're that extreme is that Lolth demands it.
Ah, okay. theocratic sense in a way.
Yeah, there's a little bit of theocracy going on there as well, because the whole reason that the Drow are the Drow is because of their almost fanatical worship of Lolth.
Okay, all right. See, like that's where that would be fun, because we could say, for example, there's certain eras that I have that give certain stories. Obviously, like there were human empires in my world that I have kind of written out. But I always sent off on the side that elves and dwarves came into their height around after the fall of giants and dragons and alien races have invaded. But also in their own sense, like kind of had their own downturn. One of the ideas I have is, for the elves, it was, I don't know, I'm getting lost in my words. I'm sorry.
You're fine. I think a common trope for elves is that they, in almost every fantasy setting that has elves in it, the elves have become subject to their own hubris.
Okay.
And that's why they're on the decline. It almost seems like in every fantasy story there's this trope of the elves were this once massive great society that has since dwindled down to a memory of its former self. And I rarely do you see a story told when the elves are at the height of their power. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's.
But
go ahead.
I think that's a pretty common trope, and it's very widely used. Is elves are just the result, suffering from the result of their own hubris. Lord of the Rings did it. Pretty much anything with elves. D&D definitely has it. Now, I'm not super familiar with 5e high elf lore. That's not something I can say I know a large amount about.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there's something like that. I'm actually more familiar with the Dragonlance lore for non-drow elves.
My dad loves dragon. He actually has a Dragonlance tattoo.
Yeah.
So he actually gave me. It's somewhere in my closet. I have like the lead paint, the lead minis from him. But like, yeah, Dragonlance is a lot of fun. I would really like to get back. I would really like to like play in a Dragonlance setting and try it out.
Yeah, Dragonlance is pretty neat. I read a bunch of the books that Terry Weissman and Margaret Weiss wrote. I believe they invented Dragonlance. And actually, I got to meet Margaret Weiss at a convention one time. That was pretty cool.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
See, like now that I've been going to concerts now, conventions are the next thing on my list. That I can feel like comfortable to go to concerts too. You know what I mean? Like go to surrounded by people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So conventions are now on that list. But yeah. Back to what we're discussing about. The one thing that so we talked a little bit about the Drow elves, and that's right. We're talking about elves in the decline, their own hubris. In a way, this is kind of like comparing. I hope it's not comparing apples and oranges, but in Stellaris, when you play the game, they have what's called fallen empires that spawn. On a normal map, normal size map, like 3 of them will spawn, 4 at max. But in Stellaris, you have like precursors and aliens and discoveries of aliens that have died of old. In Stellaris, there's what's called fallen empires, and there's 5 of them at max. 4 organic, 1 robot. And basically, they have their own stories. I recommend looking them up. It's very good. But essentially, in a nutshell, all of them are used to cover the entire galaxy. then lost everything and retreated to their main home system. But that home system has like, your starting firepower is 3 Corvettes with a firepower of 300. They have a starting firepower of like 25,000, and they're building as the game goes on as well. There's only been one time I got stupid OP and took on 1-1, but they basically have this overall they all represent their own authoritarian, religious, xenophile, and militant. But they all recommend that they all have the same thing, which is their own hubris and overall thing of we've been here longer, we're better than you. But that's where the fun of it can come in. That is, why is this shit important, right? Because lore is lore, but why is it applied to the players? And that is, in Stellaris they have what's called a war in heaven, and that is when two fallen empires go to war. And you can join them or fight them both. But basically you have to pick a side. That in itself would be something that would be very fun to play, in my opinion. Like something like, I don't know, one good example would be the High Elf Kingdom I have, for example. It's the last empire round. Has reasons that bring it down its fall and start to lead to like protests, for example. Players could easily start small and work with like, why are the protests happening? Where's the money come from? Who's pushing it? Leading to a high thing that could lead to, I don't know, a claimant from the throne or something like that. Start small and go big,
Yeah, that would be a really fun kind of idea to go down. I think that's been explored by few different stories.
Yeah. I mean, to a
but
certain
it's
extent,
always a fun trope to do.
It is a fun trope to do, and like the one thing I've kind of like gave up with D&D is, obviously mine's a lot history inspired. I'm not just taking history and copy and pasting it. I'm using different influences in history to talk about, because like I said, Embers is all about history and folklore, and I'm kind of like building up as I go. But shit, I lost my train of thought. I guess, what were we talking about?
You were talking about how you built a lot of Embers off of history and folklore. Or you didn't build it off it, but you used a lot of history and folklore for inspiration.
Oh yes, yeah, I use a lot of history and folklore for inspiration, and I feel like that's right. I remember I was talking about. I don't know if you've ever watched South Park, but there's an episode called Simpsons Did It. And the whole point of the episode is Butters is trying to be evil, and everything he's done, Bart Simpson has done. And the episode concludes with him seeing everyone as Simpsons characters with drawn awful South Park style. And it basically ends with, common tropes, yes, here and there. There's being cliche, but there's also to the point of it's probably been done, and most likely by The Simpsons. Because everything's been done by The Simpsons.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I don't think it's really possible to tell a truly unique story anymore. I think any story that you'll find, takes inspiration from something else. But that's kind of the great part of it as well, is we have so much information and stories and so many other things that we can pull from to make the greatest amalgamation of the stories and the knowledge that we have, and retell it in a new light, where it might not be a brand new story, but it's its own special thing. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and there's also another thing to it, and that's the heart of it. Because I feel like if you put enough heart into it, even common tropes can excel. Sorry, excuse me. One such example would be characters, right? For example, building off what I was saying earlier with the protests, right? Players are just throwing something out here. They're in a say they're in Zoiderlands. My world's Germany, Zoiderlands. In Zoiderlands, it's a very industrial country, incredibly industrial, and it's Victorian steampunk. So the age of flight has long been discovered. Zeppelins reign supreme, and there's a protest going on there. What I have for them is what is essentially an authoritarian society that was had its own story behind it, but just saying authoritarian, conservative monarchy. One such player could be we'll go with a drow elf. Not only is he a drow, he's an elf in a country that's authoritarian, that's not elf, that doesn't have much elf into it anymore, and whatever elves are there are not drow. So why would he be protesting? Well, common living standards, and also he's been kicked down. You know, you don't want to go too far in the race, obviously. You know what I mean? But being different, though, is something easy. A big reason why I bring that up is because one thing I've discovered a lot is there has been an always, especially in an anarchistic sense, in the Hasidic Jewish community, believe it or not. Especially during before World War I. You know what I mean? It's I know it's weird because you don't think Jewish Judaism with anarchism, but
the Jews are extremely rejective of other authority, actually.
See, I'm just discovering this, and I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised in a very very Christian household. The Jews have been authoritarian since they were Jews, basically, since they left Egypt. You know.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's super cool because I'm just discovering that, and I really want to start developing and exploring stuff like that because I have my little inspiration that is kind of like loosely inspired from Christianity, but I like the idea of a group of people who persisted like that with anti-authority and are still there, especially during a time where change is supposed to be happening because rights and stuff. Because as I've discovered in the Victorian era is so much centered on the rights, the ending of feudalism essentially. But having a group like that, especially one that's so big, across countries, would be very fun. Yeah, I know I'm digressing a lot from elves, but having an inspired group like that in a D&D setting would be very interesting.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, not saying I'm using the actual Jews, but because you don't ever want to tie it to where the rule of thumb is I don't want to be it's inspired but loosely inspired. You know what I mean? That way, I don't hopefully be yelled at. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, you don't want to get canceled for using inspiration. I think it's a little silly actually that people get canceled for using inspiration from modern day or even from history. I think that our history is long and troubled, but you can use a lot of inspiration from it to make some really great stories.
Yeah, for sure, and that's where I'm kind of developing that a little bit, with my world setting. And speaking of world setting, because I know we have about 15 minutes left, I know we briefly talked about in our messages that you were kind of thinking about some world setting about your pirate campaign. So if I remember correctly, in the pirate campaign, the elves left the material world, your material world. I feel like due to a war. It's been so long.
Yes. So the elves had. Yeah, it's been a really long time, but I do kind of have that world floating around in the back of my brain at any given moment. Yeah, so the way that setting worked is there had been that massive war between this is a very common trope where you had this massive world-shattering event.
Yeah.
My world-shattering event was a war between dragons and primordial titans, essentially.
Yeah.
And the elves had all left into the Feywild as essentially refugees from that war, and so very few were left actually in the world. That was my lore for elves there.
Very cool. Very cool. See, like, it's kind of fun. And now that I think about it, like, just thinking about it now, one such event I could say is it doesn't, there's world-shattering events, and there's how much influence you want to play into everything. I mentioned to you Fallen Grace, which has been my world-shattering event. But one such idea I have for the elves, especially from my world, is why the elves conglomerate around, that small city-state in the northern fjords. Not like something like Zoylands, where for a long time, being Germanic faith, elves were, I'm assuming elves were, influencing what is now modern-day Germany. But one such event could be the war between, let's say, two empires. Not even two empires, empire and tribes. For example, Tiberia, my world Rome, is fighting the Fjordish tribes, right? In my world's Germany. And maybe something could be like, especially if I want my players to go super like BC, be like, oh hey, the elves are helping out the Swedish tribes, and Tiberia has responded by basically destroying wherever they can as Elvish, And the thing about empires is a lot of them can last in wars a very long time.
Yeah.
So that could easily be a way as to why my elves did essentially what the elves in Tolkien did, just yeeted themselves out of this existence. Not so much existence, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, they left. They went. Elves. That's another common elf trope: is retreating back to where they are safe or where they came from.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I don't know. I feel like the reason, one of the things I did is because I feel like everyone has to ask that question, like, how common is this X race? Because play isn't a big thing. For example, if you're in I don't know, I think it was our friend Rachel who played a bugbear, and it was like, oh hey, this is a bugbear in this setting. They're kind of like scary.
Yeah, bugbears are kind of scary. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, bugbears are scary. So that was an interesting thing to set up, because I never really had the players go you know what I mean, or like an NPC. I don't know. I'm digressing, but I was gonna say, what time is it? It's 9:48. I don't know. Is there anything in particular you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, so you have these elves in your world that essentially function as gatekeepers, if I'm recalling correctly, right?
That's correct.
So, do you have any, I guess, particular lore behind that?
Yeah. So the rough idea I had was for a long time the elves came. I'm toyed if I want to say they're full alien. You know what? Fuck yeah. They're from my world's Feywild, and I had through mix of religious as well as technological connections via my world's Gith, and who I've had worked on, and the Vidalcan, who I have worked on. The Vidalcan were seafaring, almost like using solar sails in the galaxy, and they now remain on Tymir, my old Shadowfell. But basically, the reason why I have the elves play gatekeeper is because they are the high elves in particular. They were the ones who were able to go through the gates and enter the material world. Their influence wasn't as spread out as the dwarves, who the dwarves kind of like went to every mountain range they could and went home. But like the elves control these gates because that's simply put, they know where to find them, and they've been here long enough to find them. Especially to give skill. This is something that I kind of justify it is, it takes generations and generations get past, but humans live to be 80 and elves live to be 85, 8,850 or something like that. So basically, the reason why I have them as control the gatekeepers is because they've been here long enough to find them.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. You have that ability to, if you live that long, you can really dedicate a really large amount of time to something, and that's something that in your lore you really you can consider is, a human might have 20, 30, 40 years to commit to something, if they really are really passionate about it. An elf can commit hundreds of years to something, and so that's kind of a neat spin on it, is just the difference of life expectancy there. Another thing that was interesting to me, so there is this is kind of going back to the Dragonlance elves. There is a character in one of the books, can't remember his name right now, but he's a half elf.
Okay.
Who was raised amongst the elves, as kind of a bastard son.
Okay.
But he had someone who was essentially a childhood friend, and they grew up together. And it was interesting because one of the things that they wrote about was that as they were growing up, this half-elf matured significantly faster than the elf who he was the same age as growing up, simply because of the life expectancy difference and how they treated each other, how they treated the two differently, just because one lived so much longer than the other. And I think that's an interesting aspect to any fantasy setting, is thinking about, well, when you have these different races, you can think, well, they're going to act different ways simply because of how much longer they live than others, or how much shorter they live. You could flip that on its head, and you could say, well, goblins do what goblins do because they live for like 15 minutes.
Yeah. That's true about goblins. It's hard to tell how much they live long, since they usually get killed before that happens.
Yeah, I mean, an old goblin is a rare sighting.
Yeah, that's something I need to really touch on my universe's goblins. I just kind of have them situated in the Masonic and Isles, and haven't really touched on them. I'm still doing my homework on them.
Goblins are great. I love goblins.
Keep that a note then for the next DM talk. But yeah, having someone live that long, is a big thing. But the one thing I have, especially that I'm working on with this high elf empire, I like the idea of there are communities and stuff like that. But in terms of empires and stuff, there once was a grand elven empire, no longer there. The biggest claim in itself is the one you guys are currently in the capital of Citadel. It's an empire itself. There's kings, there's counts, kings, queens, and an empress, an emperor. But they've lasted, and they control the gates and administer most of travel. But the one thing and this could be fun, is twisting it on its head. The players discover, and I have it in my role, and I've already just kind of described it to you guys, that there's quite a bit of travel and trade going between your world and Taima through the gate. And the big reason why I have that towards is something I associate in the back of my head is, in a past campaign, the elves needed to open the gates and get trade. Otherwise, otherwise they could fold their empire. Getting money helps a lot of things, even including no matter how old you are.
Yeah, money and trade are massive for empires. Those are really useful storytelling components, especially when you're telling stories about these large empires. Is just the different things that empires might need, like trade, land, if they need food or anything like that. Could be an interesting story element, especially to provide motivation for certain actions or things like that.
Yeah, and next we can always do a part 2 to this. There's quite a few other ones I want to talk on. One such was wood elves. I read something funny about wood elves and being like, if given a bowl, if given a wood carved bowl or the opportunity to grow an actual tree branch into the size of a bowl and use that as a bowl, even though it might take you like half a year, an elf will do that.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, a wood elf.
That's.
So I really want to touch on wood elves again at some point, but I feel like for what we're talking right now for tonight, this is a good DM talk, especially for being our first time. So I hope you had fun, dude.
Yeah, it was a good time. I'm looking forward to having more discussions about wooden bowls, elves, dwarves, goblins, and the like.
Heck yeah, and I'm doing my homework now with my job and stuff. So I'll tell you more about it later. I'm gonna end the stream now. Goodbye, stream.
Goodbye, stream.